we're getting ready to segue into a very important segment. Um, during I hate, I don't know how to, every time I get ready to say this, it sounds peculiar when I say during the last part of my father's life, when really he wasn't trying to leave here. His life was cut short by an assassin's bullet. But during those latter days, and when I say latter days, I mean starting around 65, 66, he started focusing his attention heavily on economic injustice. He very well understood, though, in the early 50s, that economic injustice and racial injustice were inseparable twins. That's what he said. And so we can't talk about racial injustice and not deal with economic injustice. And that's why SCLC, through Operation Breadbasket, began to delve into that issue. And one of the tenets of Operation Breadbasket, which was kind of the economic arm of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that my father co-founded with 99 other ministers, was that they called on corporations to hire more Blacks, to elevate more Blacks, to promote more Blacks, because many of us were at the low-paying jobs back in the 60s. But then finally, they pushed corporations to open up bank accounts in the communities where they were doing business, in those places where there were Black banks. And so I'm just happy today to have a gentleman join me who actually was my classmate in Leadership Atlanta. We were the 50th anniversary class. Ashley D. Bell used to be the regional director of the SBA, is now general counsel for the Black Bank Foundation and Fund. I'm a board member of the National Black Bank, and I'm delighted to be a part of it. When he had this dream and vision, I told him I wanted to join ranks with him because, this is part of the work that my father was doing. He's a partner at Denton's, I think it's the world's largest law firm. And so we're just happy to have him join us to talk about love correcting economic injustice. So if we can get Ashley to come on so that we can have this wonderful conversation. Hey there, my friend.
Good morning, sister. How are you?
I am
fantastic.
Doing
Good to be with you.
Wonderful. And we are so glad to have you. We've been doing some incredible work to the National Black Bank Foundation and Fund. And I know that there's some exciting news on the horizon that we will be announcing soon. But we just wanted to talk to you briefly about how love can show up to really move the needle on economic injustice. We all know in this conversation that there is a great wealth disparity in this nation as it relates to the Black community in particular. And so I want to ask you, share with us about the Black Bank Foundation and Fund, because a lot of people don't know what it is and the work we're trying to do. And how does what you're doing with this initiative address the injustices in our economic system?
Well, thank you, Bernice. And this is just incredible to be with you. And thank you for all the work you've done to contribute to the narrative and the work that we've been able to do. And you're right, some great things are on the horizon, but a lot that's been just only possible because of you being able to stand in this gap and help us pull things together and make the calls and get people to really wake up and see what we're up against. Because the reality is that, as you said in your father's one of his last speeches about the Bank In movement, we had 5 times as many Black banks the day he gave that speech than today. So just think about that. We have 5 times as many opportunities in communities across this country for Black people to get access to the money they need for their families, for their nonprofits and their businesses than we do today. Love begins with trust and transparency. And throughout our nation's history, time and time again, the financial services center has lost our trust over and over again. So when we start and we look back at the beginning from the Freedmen's Bureau was a failed bank that was, it started off as 40 acres and a mule, and we ended up some kind of way getting a bureau that wouldn't allow us to get access to credit. And we all know that access to credit is like water. Communities that have credit grow. Communities that don't do not. And we lost half of Black wealth when the Freedmen's Bureau closed off of a Ponzi scheme of the federal government. And W.E.B. Du Bois said it well. He said so many Black people were hurt because of the closing of the Freedmen's Bureau that it would take generations to gain that trust back. And we still today are trying to gain that trust back. But it begins with investing in ourselves, by having a foundation like the National Black Bank Foundation, which has a really simple mission: help Black banks grow and make them sustainable. We could be the last generation to talk about even having Black banks if we don't change the course of action that we're going on. Black banks for years have been in Black communities where home values don't go up, and they represent people who are the first to get fired and the last to get hired. When you have that sort of community, it's hard to bank. So what we've been doing is, one, trying to get those banks capacity through the Black Bank Foundation and Fund and help them grow. But on the other side, which you've been very critical with, Dr. King, is helping us tell the rest of the world why they need to bank Black. Help us say that in this post-George Floyd world, everyone who's got a press release that comes out every 10 minutes about equity and how much they support our communities and all these commitments, are you really also banking your values? Do you put your money where your values are? And we don't think about Black banks in that way. People always think about being poor, but our banks can do everything everybody else can do. You can remove the word bank, and the stereotype about Black banks is the same no matter what you're talking about. You can say whether it's Black doctors, whether it's Black banks, whether it's Black businesses, all those stereotypes of not being able to compete, not being able to get the same services, not being able to have the right pricing, it's all the same. We have to fight that in the financial services, and we've been able to do that. As you work with us on the Atlanta Hawks, bringing those industries that make monies off of Black bodies and Black talent, those are the first people we're going after. And you've been a big part of that, helping them see, if you make money off of Black bodies and Black talent, why aren't you putting your money back where those bodies and talent come from, through those financial institutions? And so by shedding a light on that, we all have a responsibility. And I want to make sure everyone hears this, is that even where I work at the world's largest law firm. I had to go back to my firm and ask them the question: are we banking our values? Why aren't we banking Black? We make money in Black cities all across the country, all across the world. We're global. And we're going to be making announcements in the coming weeks about a major investment with Black banks. All of us, we've entered the phase of, we're past announcements. We got to hold people accountable now.
Exactly.
We've read all the press releases. We've read all the press releases. Now it's time to go back to our jobs where we work, where we dedicate our resources and time, and say, all right, why aren't we at least letting Black banks compete for our business? Because that's the hurdle, Bernice, is that they don't even let us compete. But if you can at least let Black banks compete, just like you can let a Black business compete, just like you can let any Black institution compete, we will always show up with our best, and we will always show up in a way that we can outperform anybody. But we got to have that chance. And now's the time for us all to pivot. Go back to where you worship, go back to where you spend your money, go back to your job. And if your job is put itself in the space of saying that we're recommitted to justice and equity in this new age of enlightenment in this country, then ask them, are you banking your values?
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you again for being with us, Ashley. And thinking about, from a macro global level view, the United States among the G7 nation has the highest income inequality. So when you look at it from a macro level, what are we doing wrong?
Well, I can tell you is when I talked about love, beginning with trust and transparency, it's the fact that we have to recognize what got us here, right? We have to recognize the history that put African Americans in the position we're in now. A lot of people like to say, hey, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, do what everybody else does. Well, it's hard when you've had a system and laws and regulations that for generations after generations keep putting you 5 steps back. And I think we saw that even with my time serving at United States Small Business Administration. When COVID hit, we had to stand up a program called the Payroll Protection Program that was open to nonprofits and businesses. And what do we see the first time it was rolled out? Black people couldn't get access to it because the government said, Congress passed and the government implemented a system that required you to go through financial services. You had to go to a bank to get access to this federal program to save your business, to save your nonprofit. But 60% of Black people are underbanked or unbanked. So off the beginning, we were at a strategic disadvantage to even get access to critical resources to save our businesses, to save our nonprofits. And that just highlighted for another generation the need for Black banks. The hardest I've ever worked in my life is having tens of thousands of Black businesses trying to find me saying, where is my closest Black bank? Because I can't get a hold of this bank that's got an app on my phone. This bank that I thought I've been banking with for 5 or 10 years, my whole life, is not calling me back. And the headlines across the country saying Black people are left out. Then we start looking for our Black banks. And then we realized they were undercapitalized and had been neglected for so long, they couldn't meet the crisis that was in front of us. We cannot have another generation go by without having Black banks there to meet this moment. And it begins with understanding their critical roles. To answer your question, if you don't have Black banks in your community that are teaching financial literacy, that are giving us the loans for small business, that are supporting our school system, educating our kids even while they're in school, talking about credit worthiness and understanding the system, then you not only have communities with food deserts and healthcare deserts, you have financial deserts, you have banking deserts. And that's equally as important when we talk about what is not in our communities. And so it's bringing community banking back. When you talk about trust, I trust the banker that I know gets his haircut the same place I get mine. Every other community, every other bank has built wealth for the white community and other communities. We just want our banks to be able to do the exact same thing, build wealth in our communities.
So I'm going to close with this, Ashley, and get your reaction. My father said this, capitalism does not permit an even flow of economic resources. With this system, a small privileged few are rich beyond conscience, and almost all others are doomed to be poor at some level. That's the way the system works. And since we know that the system will not change the rules, we are going to have to change the system. You may have already said this, but just make it absolutely clear to us, what are some practical steps, since this is the Be Loved Day and our goal is to be loved and correct unjust laws and policies. What are at least 2 practical steps that everyday folks can do to begin to change the system?
That's exactly right. And we have to take these affirmative steps. And it begins with understanding that the capitalist system that we have, when you have rules that strategically disadvantage someone because of their color, is not capitalism. It's called counterfeit capitalism. We got to have real capitalism, which allows everybody to benefit. And that begins with all of us knowing that we're going to make financial decisions every year. You're going to refinance your car, you may refinance your house, you get a loan for your kids, whatever it may be. I don't care what color you are, you touch the financial system every single day. But if you're watching right now and you know your values are in line with a more equitable and just world, then ask yourself, are you banking your own values at home? And are you doing it at work and where you grow your wealth? We have to think about it. The people managing your wealth, are they of color? Have you even thought about having someone manage your wealth that is of color? We can do that step right now. When you refinance your home in the next 2 to 3 years and try to get a better interest rate or whatever, let a Black bank compete for your business. When you're trying to get a student loan for your kids, let Black banks compete for that. When you go to work and they're talking about supplier diversity, ask them, does that also include where we put the money that goes in my paycheck? So we can all do that right now. And I think that's the beginning, Bernice, of being able to have a more open conversation of real capitalism instead of a counterfeit system that's only benefiting a few.
And thank you so much for that advice and those steps. And for everybody listening, he was speaking to all of us, regardless of our racial background, our ethnic background, because a lot of times when we say this, we think this is the message from Black people to Black people. It is to us, but it's also to the entire community. And that was the challenge that SCLC was making at the time as well. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing. I'm enjoying the journey with you. And we'll continue to make some impact and transform the world. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. We love you. Take care.
Love you too, Ashley. Did counterfeit capitalism.
That's the first time I heard that. I wrote it down. I'm gonna have to go look it up after this.
I did too. I like that. That's counterfeit capitalism. So we got to try to work on getting capitalism to work for all.
That's right.
People.